Welcome to our session. This is the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. Thank you very much for joining us here at the Japan Pavilion at COP30. We are delighted to host the panel for expansion of transition finance. So first, we would like to start with the opening remarks made by our Deputy Director General, Mr. Takuya FUKUMOTO. So Mr. FUKUMOTO, you have the floor.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Taku Fukumoto, Deputy Director General for the Green Transformation Policy and also the Innovation Policy at METI. I'm glad to welcome you all to the seminar titled For Expansion of Transition Finance. The concept of transition finance has been gaining significant global attention. I would like to touch upon a few examples. First, the Asian Development Bank, ADB, and International Energy Agency, IEA, for example, published a report examining the role of transition finance, technology and policy, and supporting the decarbonization of Southeast Asia's emission-intensive sectors. That's the first. Second, the International Capital Market Association, ICMA, ICMA, published Climate Transition Bond Guidelines, introducing the standalone climate transition bond label to high-emitting sectors. Third, the Loan Market Association, LMA, has also published a draft of the transition finance principles for a more inclusive approach to financing target. These developments reflect a major turning point in discussions on sustainable finance. To advance the net zero globally, we need a fundamental in whole society through transformation of the way we work and way we live. To realize effective reduction of global, we need to address the serious challenges in heating and manufacturing processes of so-called hard-to-abate sectors. In addition to, of course, the electrification, decarbonization of power supply. This transforms a vast amount of finance. A narrow definition of green finance may not always meet this demand. So promoting transition finance, therefore, is of critical importance. That reflect the recent initiatives made by the international financial organizations. Since every country has its own economic and geographical circumstances, energy mix, and geopolitical risks, mobilizing a wide range of technologies and energy sources is of paramount importance. To achieve the triple breakthrough, which is the core of Japanese green transformation policy, which is the first, decarbonization, the second, economic growth, third, energy security. We should always bear in mind the necessity of various pathways to achieve our common goal, which is a net zero. As I mentioned here, government of Japan has been consistently promoting the green transformation. We call it GX strategy. Transition finance is at the core of the strategy. The key to the GX strategy is pro-growth carbon pricing, designing to promote public and private investment over 150 trillion yen, which is approximately 1 trillion US dollar over 10 years, which is huge. At first step, the Japanese government has been issuing the world's first sovereign climate transition bonds. Since February last year, the government plans to issue up to 20 trillion yen, that is the 130 billion US dollar approximately, of transition bonds. The remaining part, 130 trillion yen, which is 90 billion US dollar, to the amount of target, is expected to be financed by the private sector. So the promoting transition finance in this context plays a crucial role. To promote public-private collaboration and finance, we established the GX Acceleration Agency last year. The agency provides financial support to complement risk and finance that private business and the financial institutions cannot fully cover. It will also manage the emission trading system, GXETS, starting next fiscal year, so serving as a hub for advancing the GX strategy. Today, I invited the top management of the GX Acceleration Agency, so we are thrilled to have his intervention. To accelerate the global transition through green transformation and transition finance, the Japanese government will strive to cooperate with its international counterparts, government, of course, and also the international organizations, as well as various stakeholders all around the world. Such cooperation includes the AZEC, Asia Zero Emission Community initiatives. In Asian region, demand for decarbonization finance is estimated to become around 4,000 trillion, which is 30 trillion US dollar. It's huge also, which is of critical importance for global industry and finance. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is a major challenge and must be overcome through global collaboration. I look forward to today's discussion, hoping that funding required to realize a net zero society through diverse pathways will be mobilized. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fukumoto. So next, we would like to move on to the keynote speech. The speaker is Mr. Naoki Shigetake from the GX Acceleration Agency. So Mr. Shigetake, please go ahead.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Naoki Shigetake, COO of GX Acceleration Agency, or GXA. Today, I'd like to talk about Japan GX strategy and the role of GXA, building on what just Fukumoto-san mentioned. I'm going to explain how Japan is pursuing sustainable growth through decarbonization. Around the world, the situation becomes somewhat challenging. So I believe Japan GX strategy offers a model to move forward realistically while keeping ambition alive. Japan declared its goal of carbon neutrality by 2050 in 2020. 2 years later, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida established GX Execution Council, of which I am a member. Based on our discussions, the GX strategy was approved by the cabinet in 2023. The strategy rests on two main pillars: decarbonization and economic growth through enhanced competitiveness with energy security as foundation. Outside Japan, the term GX is not widely recognized. The literal English equivalent might be green transition, but the government deliberately chose green transformation and coined as GX. So the term GX reflects Japan's government determination not only to reduce emissions, but also to transform its industrial and social system, competitiveness, and innovation. To finance this effort, Japan issued 20 trillion yen, which is about 130 billion US dollar, in sovereign GX bond, whether this is the first government-issued climate transition bonds. These will help mobilize more than 150 trillion yen, which is about 1 trillion US dollar in combined public and private sector investment over the next decade. The hallmark of Japan GX strategy is a balance between support and mandate. Too much regulation can cause carbon leakage, while too much subsidy risks inefficiency and fiscal strain. Japan therefore combines investment incentives with carbon pricing so that the public and private sectors advance together towards growth and decarbonization. Another key feature is Japan's emphasis on transition. At the G7 Hiroshima Summit in 2023, Japan proposed the idea of one goal, various pathways. The world shares one common goal, which is net zero, but each country should choose its own realistic route. Hard-to-abate sectors such as steel, cement, and chemicals cannot fully decarbonize overnight. Many Asian countries still reliant on coal cannot instantly switch to renewable. Japan's inclusive and pragmatic stance recognizes these realities while maintaining steady progress. Once viewed skeptically to some extent, this approach is now gaining global recognition. To turn GX from vision to action, Japan launched GX Acceleration Agency, or GXA, July last year. Our mission is to bridge policy, finance, and industry to accelerate implementation and make GX projects truly happen. We have three core roles. First role is providing financial support for GX investments. GX projects often involve GX-specific risks, technological risks, long payback periods, policy uncertainty, and so on and so forth. GXA takes the risks that private sector cannot. We manage a 1.5 trillion yen debt guarantee scheme and a 40 billion yen investment fund for now to mobilize private sector capital for GX initiatives. Second, introducing Japan's first full-fledged emission trading system, the growth-oriented carbon pricing scheme from fiscal 2026. By combining market mechanisms with financial incentives, we aim to create a growth-driven model for decarbonization. Third, serving as a strategic GX hub, we connect government, industry, and finance to accelerate technological and policy solutions for complex challenges of GX. Despite progress, three key challenges still remain. First, building effective collaboration. No company can achieve GX alone. We need collaboration across supply chains and clear, consistent government policy. To foster this, the government launched the GX Strategic Area Program in this August. It designates regions such as industrial complexes, data center clusters, and clean energy hubs for concentrated subsidies and regulatory support. Local governments and companies are already forming partnerships to create competitive regional GX clusters. There are more than 200 proposals as of now. Second, accelerating innovation. Existing technologies alone cannot deliver carbon neutrality. In the GX 2040 vision approved earlier this year, it is outlined how to nurture future GX technologies, the golden egg of innovation. The vision encourages collaboration between large corporations and deep tech startups, and it supports international partnership. In this September, we signed an agreement with InnoEnergy in the EU to create an ecosystem to connect clean tech innovators with industries across borders. Third, recognizing the value of green products. Even when companies develop low carbon solutions, their green value is rarely reflected in price premiums. To respond, GXA is building networks to expand demand for GX products. And we are conducting consumer surveys on green value acceptance. Results are encouraging. Many consumers are willing to pay more when sustainability benefits are clearly explained. Based on this, we are forming corporate alliances and exploring policies to distribute costs fairly along the supply chain. Furthermore, inflation and labor shortage have recently led to project cost increase and delays, causing some projects to be reconsidered. These factors, widely reported by the media, have contributed to the impression that there are headwinds against decarbonization and GX. But in my opinion, what we are seeing globally is not retreat, but transition, the calibration to balance green ambition with competitiveness. The global trends are now aligning with Japan's concept of transition, introduced at the G7 Hiroshima Summit in 2023. The key is to avoid an all or nothing mindset, and instead identify what needs to be done now and advance them steadily. That said, the implementation of GX product under current circumstances is still challenging, especially under inflation and rising costs. One promising approach is blended finance, where public and private sectors share risks and expertise. Through blended finance, challenging projects can become viable. Progress is already visible. On September 30, Japan announced the first project under hydrogen ammonia CFD scheme in Nagoya and Kawasaki. In the steel sector, new electric furnace projects are also advancing. These examples show when the public and private sectors join forces, sharing risks and combining wisdom, GX can move to tangible action even now. Particularly, support for hard-to-abate sector is critical for realistic transition. Japan's DX strategy represents more than a green policy. It is a new growth model. It aims not only to achieve carbon neutrality, but also revitalize industry, drive innovation, and enhance competitiveness. The journey will not be easy, but if we stay the course, balancing ambition with realism and collaboration with creativity, GX can become the powerful engine for sustainable prosperity, not only for Japan, but also for the world. Let's move forward together, transforming challenges into opportunities and accelerating the global green transformation for a brighter carbon neutral future. Thank you very much for attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shigetake. So next, we would like to move to the panel discussion. We will be joined by various actors from different perspectives who have all been working on this field, finance globally. I would like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Takayuki MOTOHASHI, Director for Environmental Finance Policy at METI. And joining us as panelists are Professor Jun ARIMA, Senior Policy Fellow and Environment from ERIA, and Mr. Thor, Chief Director from MUFG. And joining us as online, Ms. Cecilia Tam, Head of Investment Unit from IEA. Please turn on your camera, please. And Ms. Gemma Lawrence-Pardew, Head of Sustainability from LMA. Okay. All right, so Mr. MOTOHASHI, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning and good evening. Thank you for Sato-san. And thank you for Fukumoto-san and Takeshige-san for your thoughtful remarks. My name is Takayuki MOTOHASHI, Director for Climate Finance Policy in Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. I'm honored to moderate today's panel discussion, expansion of transition finance. Acknowledge net zero emissions will require trillions of dollars in investment, especially for to abate sectors and emerging economies. Transition finance is essential to support realistic decarbonization pathways. Green finance alone cannot meet these needs. Expanding transition finance to emerging market is critical. I believe transition finance is just a bridge between ambition and reality. So momentum is growing worldwide. In October, ERIA, ADB, METI, and IEA released a report highlighting the importance of transition finance for energy efficiency and fuel switching. The Loan Market Association, LMA, published a draft guide to transition loans, clarifying transition finance from green finance and proposing broader definitions. Similarly, the International Capital Market Association, ICMA, ICMA updated its guideline for climate transition bonds, clarifying the distinction for green bonds and providing examples for eligible project categories. These developments reflect a growing recognition of need for financial institutions that support realistic decarbonization pathways. With Japan, we have recognized we have developed a GX strategy to reduce emissions with maintaining energy security and economic growth. Early this year, METI served working group to explore ways to expand transition finance in Asia, where demand is over 20 trillion US dollars. This group supports an inclusive approach, advocating broad finance for hard to abate sectors aligned with long-term climate goals. Today's discussion effects. So we are joined by four distinguished panelists from ERIA, MUFG, IEA, and LMA, each bringing unique perspectives and deep expertise. I encourage our panelists to share practical insight and innovative ideas, and I invite all of you to engage actively. Thank you very much. Let's begin. First topic is perspective on global trends for transition finance. Let's now hear from our panelists. So Professor ARIMA, you have been deeply involved in international climate negotiations, including the Kyoto Protocol. So based on your experience, how do you view the current global landscape and the growing need for transition finance? Please.
Thank you very much, Motohashi-san, for your kind introduction, and good evening, everybody. And for those who may not be necessarily familiar with my organization, ERIA, ERIA stands for Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, established back in 2008 as a regional think tank for providing policy analysis and various report for encouraging global regional economic collaboration and also sustainable development. And as you pointed out, I have been deeply involved in climate negotiation for many, many years. And actually, this COP is 20th COP for me. And I have been involved too long. But looking at the recent trend, I detect certain development. In particular, back in 2021, when the Glasgow Climate Pact was adopted, there was a growing tendency that the binary argument, such as green or nothing, was very much prevailing. And at that time, the backcasting approach, starting from 2050 carbon neutrality, was somehow the de facto standard. And the immediate phase out of fossil fuel was strongly advocated. But unfortunately, this sort of discussion is not necessarily in line with the energy reality of energy sector in the Asia-Pacific region, where there is a strong demand potential and also very much high reliance on fossil fuels, most notably coal. But I think in recent years, I mean, in the recent 2 or 3 years, partly because of such event as, say, Ukraine war or Hamas-Israel war and so forth, the importance of energy security and affordability is coming back to the agenda for many, many countries. And this is particularly true for Asian Pacific region because, the incremental demand, energy demand and the CO2 emissions are coming from this region. So they need not only climate mitigation, but also energy security and most notably affordability. So for those, pragmatic pathway is very much essential for this region in particular. So therefore, the importance of transition finance is particularly acute for this region, where there is a strong demand for energy, and also strong, how can I say, growth potential, and also the incremental CO2 emissions are coming. So how to pursue a realistic and pragmatic pathway? This is a big challenge, and transition finance is a key word for enabling such a development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I gained renewed understanding of the importance of just the energy for the context of energy security. So not in Japan, but also many other countries, especially in Asian countries. Thank you very much. And second, Mr. Ishikawa-san, MUFG has published 3 white papers on the transition finance, and also MUFG is a major player in ASEAN countries. And you are also participated in the Japan sub-working group. Thank you very much. And what implications have you observed for private financial institutions? And on your recent contact trip to institutions and officials in EU countries, and to discuss about this, Japan's endeavor to the transition finance. How has the Japan approach been received in their countries? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you to the audience. It's late Saturday, but I'm glad your faces on the panel. So thank you. If I may start, Professor ARIMA, you said this is 20th. For me, this is the 5th COP participation. Good news is that this is such an exciting event and a series of interesting discussions, so I learned a lot. The bad news is this takes place when my birthday, which I'm supposed to celebrate with my family. Yes, 2 days ago with my birthday. Last year, I was on a panel when on my birthday. So thank you for, you don't have to sing a birthday song for me, but maybe when they're making noise, you might want to sing a birthday song for me. But That's just a joke. But I always enjoy the lively conversation, and I think it's really important to understand, not just criticizing each other, but to celebrate what we've done over the past 10 plus years. But Motohashi-san, your question around Japan and ASEAN, let me start from Japan. Let me back up. Let me start from who we are. I represent a Japanese bank called MEFG. This is the largest Japanese bank. I should say second largest. We're second largest. Largest is the Bank of Japan, which is the central bank. So we're the second largest. But we have the lending exposure to pretty much all the leading Japanese company, including some of the companies who's here with the showcase here. What does that mean? It means if our balance sheet size is big enough that you're systemic, but our balance sheet size is $3 trillion. That's how big we are. That means you're not in a position to cherry pick. You don't want like 3 companies or 10 companies to succeed and the rest not succeeding, right? That means companies will succeed and that's great. But we, as a largest Japanese bank, will fail to achieve net zero because we have lending exposure to all the companies. So our motto when it comes to transition, we have net zero strategy, we have net zero goal, but our motto is to support the entire economy, entire society to transition rather than just cherry pick the winners and forget about the losers. Easier to say, yeah, these companies great, we support. Forget about that's an easy choice to make, but I do not think that's a responsible way of supporting companies or society. So our motto is to support the Japanese economy as a whole, I think in line with the Japanese government. So what we did since we made the net zero commitment back in 6 months before the Glasgow COP was this net zero pledge, but also transition white paper. And we've been publishing 3 times. The latest one is the 4th one, which we actually published. But in reality, if you Google it, I'm sure you find it. But all the inputs were from our clients. So we articulated our client's transition plan. Added together is Japan Inc.'s transition plan, and we're willing to finance everything to the extent possible so that when Japan Inc. as a whole transition, we can also transition. So the way we think about it is our client transition is our transition. I don't think we can transition without our client transitioning. So that's our motto, and that's how we think about Japan's transition. On ASEAN, it's pretty much the same thing. You may not know, but we are probably the largest ASEAN bank. We're 6th largest in Indonesia. We're 7th largest in Thailand. We have minority stake in 6th largest Philippine bank. So if you add them together, we are probably the largest in ASEAN. I don't say that in front of HSBC or Standard Chartered. Maybe they're here, but we're actually the largest in terms of footprint in ASEAN. What does that mean? Again, when it comes to supporting ASEAN transition, we cannot just win. We cannot just cherry pick the winner and forget about the rest. How do we come up with the inclusive approach? That's been our transition strategy, not only in Japan, but also in Asia. And METI kindly put together the working group, I think it was earlier this year. And we've had 5 or 6 intensive discussion, including corporates who are operating in ASEAN, and invited their views, and we also provided our views. So the conclusion there was that we need inclusive approach rather than exclusive or cherry picking approach, because if you only cherry pick, the ASEAN as a region or some countries will be left behind, which is not what we want. So you need a macro level approach. You need an inclusive approach rather than exclusive or cherry picking. And I'll finish in 30 seconds, which is once the report was published with a METI representative and myself, we visited Europe and also London and some other EU cities, including Brussels, to present the findings and the key takeaways. There's a lot of good discussions and commonalities, but one thing I think there's an interesting discussion was about NDC of these countries. Some said, and our view is that, my view at least, is that NDC aligned projects must be financed because that's part of NDC. But some said, oh, no, NDCs are not necessarily ambitious enough. Therefore, projects or companies that are aligned to local NDCs may not qualify for a credible pathway. And I think that's an interesting discussion to be had. I have a view, but not that I'm going to push this view to all the audience, but I think it's important to have that conversation. What does NDC mean? Is it credible? Is it not credible? Is it okay for some government to say, no, NDCs are not good enough? I agree that NDC added together is not going to reach 1.5. But I don't think at a macro level, micro level, individual institution can go and challenge NDCs. So I think that was an interesting, I guess, I wouldn't say disagreement, but point of discussion, which we may want to follow up. So those are some of the key takeaways from the conversation we had in Brussels and other EU cities. So maybe I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for it's a very comprehensive landscape. So I'm very impressed about your understanding. So just I would like to know the play a role of the cooperation in the especially for the Asian institutional fields. So I would like to know I would like to ask the next session. So sorry for the waiting for. Thank you very much, Cecilia-san. And so you recent report estimate 4 to 5 trillion US dollars in investment is need. So could you share additional insight we should be aware of in your report alongside with your report? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and a big thank you to Japan for the opportunity to join today's session and for allowing us some time to share some of the findings from our recent transition finance report that the IEA released last month. So as we all know, investments in energy transition is essential, but unfortunately, current levels remain insufficient to meet the long-term transition goals. Of course, part of these investments will be supported through green finance, which plays a critical role in the transition. However, green finance alone will not be enough to deliver the full energy and economic transition that will be required. In the coming decade, alongside continued investments in green transitions, it'll be equally important to provide financing together with transition strategies for hard-to-abate sectors where emission reductions are particularly difficult, and to emerging and developing economies. This approach allows economic activity to continue while making meaningful contributions to emissions reductions. And we need to see finance going to where emissions are. And the financing provided really needs to be within these guardrails, is what we call transition finance. Estimating exactly how much transition finance is going to be required is a particularly challenging task, given that each region's unique transition pathway is going to be very different depending on resources and national circumstances. Estimating this is particularly challenging. So what we did at the IEA was used our scenario numbers to provide an indicative scale of how much we believe transition investments will be needed over the next decade. And based on our 1.5 degree scenario, as well as our scenario looking at implementing all of the countries' announced pledges, we've estimated that over the next decade, somewhere between 4 to 5 trillion of investments will be supported or will need to be supported by transition finance. Note that this is not an exhaustive number. It covers a wide range of sectors, as you can see in the middle pie chart, from natural gas to industry, buildings, transport, and critical minerals. You'll also see in the far right that half of all the investments that will be needed are going to be in emerging markets and developing economies. Whether these investments can be supported by transition finance will depend on meeting key process requirements, such as the existence of credible transition strategies. The fact that some sectors are not explicitly shown here does not mean that they fall outside the scope of transition finance. 4 to 5 trillion over the next 10 years, this is equal to about 4 to 500 billion annually. And that's very comparable to the scale of today's green bond market. If we look back at the green finance market, it's expanded nearly 15 times over that past decade, growing from a very modest base to becoming an important driver of clean energy investments worldwide. In the coming decade, achieving a similar trajectory for transition finance will be essential to make tangible progress in supporting investments in hard-to-abate sectors and in emerging markets and developing economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia-san. So it's a very good report, and so it is easy to access the report freely. So you can access this report. It's a very clear-cut explanation of the transition finance at the standpoint in the IEA, and so of course it is very good for advisor for information from your report. Thank you very much. So lastly, Gemma-san, so the guide to transition loans is a significant step. What challenges do you see in the loan market, and what motivated the publication of this guide? Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. So when we started our project back in June 2024, we wanted to start with a survey to understand exactly what we were trying to overcome and what potential solution there may be. So we did a survey to industry, global industry, together with our sister organizations, the APNMA and LSTA, to see where the challenges were coming from. And we had over 100 institutions participate, which was wonderful. And for me, and maybe we shouldn't say challenge, I actually quite like the phrase interesting point of discussion, but potentially the most fundamental challenge at the time was the lack of a globally agreed definition of what transition finance was. There were conflicting views, which were often based in the geography, the sector, or the specific borrower type at hand. The other key points of debate we saw is whether the end state of transition should equate to absolute sustainability, or again, it should allow for that progressive improvement, the pragmatism, if you will, whether transition relates purely to greenhouse gas emissions reductions, or does it capture wider considerations such as adaptation, whether it should include the managed phase out of high emitting assets, and if so, what should that look like? How the concept of just transition should be integrated, and then also whether transitional activity should lock in carbon intensive assets. And then depending on where these questions landed or the answers provided, there was also the risk that the definitions unintentionally would limit access to transition finance, specifically for pre-industrialized economies or those at the earliest stages of their journey. And again, coming back to who we need to transition, we actually need the real economy, the entire economy to transition. We were very conscious that we did not wish to sort of create insurmountable barriers at the first stage. So whilst there was no consensus on the fundamentals, it's potentially unsurprising that we haven't seen that scaling of transition labeled products, which hopefully we will start to see now. And then quickly on the key obstacles to scaling transition finance, probably very well known, but again, technology project risk, decarbonisation and hard to abate sectors often depends on emerging or capital intensive technologies. So you have execution risk and uncertain returns. Weak demand signals, maybe potentially given the energy security situation we find ourselves in, there can sometimes be weak demand signals with regards to new greener types of energy. Policy and regulatory uncertainty, and also the general geopolitical situation we tend to find ourselves in, and the list goes on, which is sort of included on the slide. And then specifically to transition labelled issuance, which is obviously what we were looking at, there were the fears that went with the label itself. So ambiguity and the fears of greenwashing. So without standard enforceable definitions and metrics, issuers were obviously hesitant to launch transition labeled instruments for fears of being challenged by regulators or NGOs. And I think this also explains why we've seen momentum in the jurisdictions that are far advanced in this section. So Japan is obviously an example with METI sectoral roadmaps, and also the ASEAN taxonomy, which incorporates these amber categories. The deals are potentially complex to structure with a number of conditionalities and, again, limited precedence and liquidity. And then finally, what I'd like to pick up on is also those real economy challenges, which have been mentioned a little bit before. We thought it was absolutely vital that we focused on the real economy, because they're the part we ultimately need to transition. We need to bring them on the journey with us. And what became increasingly clear during the project, and also as part of broader market debate, is that small and medium-sized enterprises were often left behind. Regulatory and financial frameworks, particularly in Europe, tend to focus on the large corporates, even though SMEs make up the majority of global businesses and tend to contribute a significant share of emissions. The requirements for transition plans, disclosure, verification, they're much easier for larger corporates to meet than the smaller entities, which have limited capacity and expertise. And finally, the question I often hear is, where's the incentive? At present, there's very few direct financial incentives for the SMEs or for the real economy more broadly to engage in the transition. And while the longer term benefits are clearer, in the short term, the cost, complexity and reputational risk can deter participation. And the same applies to the emerging markets and developing economies, which, as has been mentioned, require over $1 trillion investment annually through 2030 and beyond to align with the global net zero goals. And yet many transition frameworks that we see are designed for industrialized economies, not for the global transition we need to achieve. So turning to what we were looking at, and I think this is the next slide. Oh, sorry, we've done that. Next one. Sorry, next slide. We started with a stock take of where we were. And what we first of all wanted to look at was quite an important distinction, I think, of financing the transition versus labeled transition finance, because there was a bit of confusion between terms. Now, financing the transition, to me, refers to the mobilization of all forms of capital, labeled or unlabeled, across the economy that support decarbonizations. And it covers investments in both low carbon and hard to abate sectors and represents the economy-wide movement to net zero. So it incorporates green as well as more. Labeled transition finance, by contrast, is a subset of that broader effort, and it's applicable at the transaction level. In the loan market, this may include sustainability-linked loans and also transition loans that explicitly help companies, particularly in high-emitting sectors, to decarbonize over time. And in practice, much of the capital driving the transition today is unlabeled. And that's what we wanted to look at. Why? The labeled segment remains relatively small, as we've seen from some of the statistics put forward. And it's largely because of definitional ambiguity and also the perception of that higher complexity and risk, as I mentioned. And when looking at the labels and structures, it tends to fall into two categories. You have the use of proceeds, which obviously until October this year predominantly focus on the financing of green projects and activities. And then also the sustainability linked instrument, which has been a transitional tool since its inception in 2019, but potentially has been used for issues or KPIs broader than decarbonisation. So we did our stock take, we looked at the challenges, we looked at what we wanted to overcome, and that's what led to the development of the transition loan principles, which are supposed to be that emerging evolution to support the market. I think I'm going to talk about those a little bit later, so I will stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Gemma-san. So your explanation is very thoughtful, and so I hope it will help the facilitate the smooth adoption of transaction finance in the loan market. So one question: so when will you finalize this draft guidance? When will you?
So the guidance is out. Sorry,
Yes.
the guidance is out. It's out as an exposure draft, which we launched a few weeks ago. And the reason we launched it as an exposure draft is although we believe it's currently fit for purpose, as the market starts to use it, we would like active engagement as to potentially hurdles to overcome. So, and then we will release it as, you know, the green loan, the transition loan principles that people are so used to seeing in the next 6 to 12 months. But it's to get that active engagement piece and hopefully be a slightly softer launch for borrowers as well.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the next, let's now move to our second topic, how to further promote transition finance and rules of various institutions. So first, Cecilia-san, so what kind of policy design is needed to efficiently scale up transition finance? How scale up approach cross-border capital flows, incentives, monitoring, and stakeholder engagement. So if you have some implication, please give me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. So in trying to scale up transition finance in the energy sector, it's really critical that we consider really two key areas. One is credibility, and the other is inclusiveness. And both are essential in helping to drive more finance or capital into transition investments. Both public and private players can support the design of different frameworks, really guided by principles of credibility and inclusiveness. To maintain credibility, having a clear transition strategy is, of course, important, but we also need to track progress. And here, tracking key performance indicators and ensuring continuous follow-ups and updates are equally important. When we were developing the transition finance report, we provided sectoral insights on iron and steel, cement, critical minerals, and natural gas. And within that, we also recommended what we felt could be key performance indicators to really help these sectors track progress towards decarbonization. It's also, given today's economic and geopolitical uncertainty, rather difficult to capture all relevant factors at the initial planning stage. So strategies need to be regularly updated to remain realistic and relevant over time, reflecting technological changes as well. When we look at inclusiveness, and if you look at the figure here, you have the core or the current transition finance discussion shown in blue. And then above and below, when we think about inclusiveness, we also need to consider how we address and bring into the discussion those parts that above who decide to opt out, or the opt-out group, and then below, those are left out. So if we want to scale transition finance, we also need to bring in the opt-out group who decide not to move forward with investments, and those that are left out. And this is often not due to intention, but in many emerging and developing economies, what we see is that they're really only at the start of their transition strategies. And often due to limited capacity, we see that many developing countries end up in this left out group. And this also includes sectors where emissions reductions are particularly challenging, as well as for many small and medium-sized enterprises. And hence, in our report, we focus on those who have opted out or have been left out of the transition finance discussion. And the key question is really around how do you bring in these players into the conversation and enable them to continue investing while also advancing on their own pathways towards emissions reductions, rather than excluding them from the transition process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So it's a very good, graphical explanation. So we understand very much. So your thought, especially in the IEA level. Next, so Professor ARIMA, could you briefly introduce ERIA's recent work including the joint report with ADB and METI, and if it possible, share your thought on the case studies and technology roadmaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Motohashi-san. And ERIA, my organization, is very much deeply involved in ASEC initiative, explained by FUKUMOTO-san and SHIGETAKE-san. And ERIA has the Asia Zero Emission Center, and it is something like the secretariat for implementation of the ASEC. And transition finance is one of the key pillars of the Asia Zero Emission Center's activities. And we are involved in multiple projects to support transition finance ecosystem in the region. The first pillar is Asia Transition Finance Study Group, just introduced by ISHIKAWA-san, a platform for regional stakeholders to share their challenges and also experiences for transition finance. Second pillar is active engagement with governments and also industry players and financial institutions. And for necessary actions, this includes policy papers drafted with ADB and METI, as just you have explained. And third pillar is providing insights related to transition finance through such report as technology list and perspectives for transition finance in the Asia for helping decisions as a guidebook for financial institutions. And the ERIA ADB METI joint report published this May clearly points out that it is insufficient just to focus on zero emission or green technologies alone for meeting regional short midterm challenges, noting that their national energy situation is very much different. Instead, it proposes three key investment investment stimulines. First, scaling up renewables. And second pillar is building green enabling infrastructure. And third, decarbonization, hard to abate and high emission sectors. Particularly, second and third type investment is quite crucial. And it has tended to be overlooked by green finance. But such investment as switching from coal to natural gas and grid development, energy conservation, and co-firing with coal and ammonia, and co-firing with gas and hydrogen are extremely important in securing balanced and realistic pathway towards energy security and decarbonization. And I heard that yesterday, Japan has received Fossil of the Day award on the very reason that Japanese government is promoting such technologies as co-finance, co-firing between coal and natural gas, coal and ammonia, or natural gas and hydrogen, saying that it is, locking in the carbon fossil fuel technologies. But I think that is not based on the proper understanding of the reality in this region. Rather, looking at the energy reality in this region, noting that fossil fuel cannot disappear overnight. I think providing such a technology is very much important. So I think Japan should be very much proud of, the advocating such technologies. And coming back to the report, and the report presents two high-level roadmaps for power and industrial sectors designed to guide technology adoption and transition finance and policy dialogue among stakeholders across the ASEAN region. And the technologies which I have exemplified, listed in those reports. And also that report recommends collaborative actions among stakeholders in three areas. First, focus on first-of-a-kind projects and vital for new technologies to establish in this region. Second, regional standardization for fuel quality and safety, and also carbon accounting to remove barriers for trade and investment. And finally, building regional financing facility, focusing on industrial transition and fully utilizing existing structures by institutions like ADB. Okay. So all in all, my organization area is determined to make a continuous contribution to development of the sound environment for transition finance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Arima. So I understand the joint report was released at the recent ASEC leaders meetings. And so I hope transition finance will continue to expand Asian in the countries along with the report. Thank you very much. And I understand the difficulty of the US constitution, constituting the report. So Gemma-san, and the guidance, your guidance emphasize SMEs and emerging markets. And what expectations do you have with these sectors, and how can we support realistic transition pathways for them? Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, we've launched the guide to transition loans in October 2025. And again, one of the fundamental aims of this was to create an instrument that could primarily be used by borrowers in high emitting and hard to abate sectors that were looking to undertake a genuine decarbonisation journey, but who are not yet fully aligned to the Paris Agreement. And whilst there was quite considerable debate, particularly in Western Europe, around the need for a distinct transition label and what it should encompass, that debate was very much focused on sort of ambition versus inclusivity and the potential risk of excluding the very sectors that need to finance the change. So because paths across sectors, jurisdictions and starting points are very varied, the principles are deliberately flexible rather than prescriptive. They're not designed to create a new taxonomy. We've intentionally avoided prescribing explicit examples of eligible categories. And instead, we've sought to be inclusive by encouraging borrowers to reference existing national and regional taxonomies and frameworks where in existence to identify credible pathways. But if we look into the specifics, so the next slide, I'll be very quick on this one because I don't think there's anything new. Entity level finance, it's kind of where it starts. The sustainability linked product, what we did was develop a set of guidance points or guardrails for consideration when structuring a decarbonisation focused SLL. There's nothing fundamentally new here. The market is doing this in practice, but for completeness, we felt it important to reaffirm the SLLs and that it should continue to be used to support the climate transition objectives. But if we move on to the core focus of our project, the new transition labelled use of proceeds instrument, so the next slide, share a lot structural similarities with the green loan principles, but obviously designed for a slightly different purpose. Structurally, the framework should look very familiar. 4 of the 5 core components, so use of proceeds, project evaluation, selection, management of proceeds and reporting, mirror those in the green loan principles. Where they really differ is that first component, the entity level transition strategy. And this is a fundamental addition and it anchors the credibility of the entire framework. So to qualify as a transition loan, the borrower must have a clear, credible transition strategy at an organisational level, showing that the business as a whole is on a decarbonisation pathway. Now, again, to bring in that flexibility and ensure we are not shutting out the whole economy, we very purposely used the words credible transition strategy. It may seem small, but what we wanted to emphasize is that you do not need a fully developed transition plan. There just has to be evidence of genuine intent and progress towards a lower carbon model. And without that, even if the project looks green, it can't be labeled as a transition loan. The rest of it, I think, there are notes on the slide and there are guardrails put in place, but the rest of it, I think, should be fairly straightforward. But if we move to the next slide, this is where we really dived into the engagement with the SMEs and the emerging markets and developing economies. So next slide, please. And again, one thing that we wanted to bring to our world is that transition finance cannot be approached through a one-size-fits-all lens. And the divergence we see globally in what is considered transition stems from the simple fact that all sectors and regions are not starting from the same baseline. So starting with sectoral and regional specificity, that's really about grounding transition finance in reality. And again, the reference to pragmatism. So I previously mentioned the ASEAN taxonomy and also METI's own sector-specific roadmaps for transition finance. But to me, what both of these do is they highlight example where that local context matters. So infrastructure maturity, capital costs, regulatory capacity all shape what a credible transition looks like. So for SMEs and for those emerging and developing economies, technological and financial constraints are very real. Overly rigid or uniform targets risk being impractical or even exclusionary. So the first takeaway for me is that transition finance must be regionally rooted. They have to reflect the local conditions of development stages. And whilst I completely agree, there's a lot of debate around NDCs, I still think you need to be respectful of where the region is and how the government is supporting it. Moving on to the second point of shorter-term feasible targets. Again, I think it's important that rather than prescribing the setting of distant net zero ambitions that may feel unattainable, borrowers instead could benefit from breaking that journey down into realistic, commercially and technologically available steps. And it helps in two ways. It builds credibility because investors can see tangible progress, and also it unlocks financing opportunities because short-term milestones are easier to measure, monitor, and verify. So again, it's that practicality that really is going to provide the bridge between ambition and bankability. And then finally, the interactive and adaptive approach. Transition should be viewed as interactive and adaptive. It's not a one-off declaration of desire. Technology, policy, markets, they're all evolving really quickly. So what looks credible today may need updating tomorrow. So transition plans or transition strategies should commit to periodic review and enhancements, ensuring continuing improvement and alignment with those long-term net zero pathways. And I think what's important to get through is flexibility doesn't mean lower ambition. It means staying relevant and effective over time. So I think in short, in order to really contextualize and bring the real world economy along, we need sector and regional realism. We need achievable near-term targets and an adaptive mindset. And these are all essential to building that credible, scalable transition finance market. And it's those real core principles that we've tried to embed in our own work, hopefully successfully. But I think that's what's really needed to engage that SME and the EMD piece.
Thank you very much, Gemma-san. So we are so very understanding so why so big picture and very thoughtful and implications. Thank you very much. And finally, so Ishikawa-san, based on your experience, how can financial institutions continue to expand in transition finance? What are your thoughts on blend finance on the role of government support? Please, thank you.
Thank you very much. And I know we only have 5 minutes, so I'll try to be quick. First of all, Cecilia, you mentioned the credibility and also this opt-out and left-out. You may have heard, but I shared a stage with your colleague last week in Tokyo, where we discussed the credibility and inclusiveness. Are they trade-off, or can you meet both? I think it's important to, of course, pursue both. But if you can only choose one, which is it? I think that's, again, another question to be had. And I think in this context, Gemma, in the LMA guideline, I think you highlighted in your presentation, but also in the report you published, you started by asking, is this transition finance or financing the transition? I think this is where the nuance is important. And I always call it loss in transition, not loss in translation. I think, but it's important to distinguish the two. And when we often, I think when Japanese government talk about transition finance, I think you're kind of trying to cover both. It's macro level transition, but at the same time, of course, credibility is important. But what do you do with left outs? As Cecilia mentioned, if left out is at 2%, maybe it's tolerable. But if it's 80% is left out, that's not good enough, right? That's not a right policy. So how do you encourage everyone to transition, of course, at the right pace, is the role of the government. I think that's where the government has to step in and set the policy. So maybe I'm going to wrap up by touching on how many P's? 6 P's I have. And this will come up in the exam, so take your note. 6 P's. First P is principle. Principle that I think we need a macro level transition. You don't want a certain country or region left behind. That I think is a principle that we need. Second P, pragmatism. Pragmatic approach is needed given the current energy system, but also the geopolitical tension. We can't just say this is the ideal pathway. That's not going to work, as Arima-san said earlier. Third P, partnership, and that's where the blended finance comes in. And Shigetake-san, you also mentioned the blended finance. At the end of the day, blended finance is a risk share mechanism. If we cannot finance, we need somebody else to take the risk or share the risk with us. So the government with different risk-adjusted return expectation can come and take some certain risk. So I think that's a pretty important in creating the partnership between the private and public. Next, practicality. Again, we shouldn't waste time in what's right or wrong. Taking action is exactly what we should be focusing on. I think that's what we heard from Simon Steele a few days ago. Let's talk about action rather than discussing what is right or wrong. Two more P's. One, predictability. I think that is a critically important. Sounds similar, but not exactly the same. Risks can be managed. We are in the business of managing risk, so we can manage risk, but uncertainties cannot be managed. And when the world or economy is uncertain, our client will not invest. We cannot finance, and then transition will not happen. So predictability, of course, is not something maybe Japanese government can manage everything, but at the end of the day, micro level, I don't think we can control uncertainty. It's the government, and ideally, all the parties involved in the COP negotiation need to provide uncertainty, whether it's carrot or stick. Either way, certainty provides the incentive to transition faster. Last P, and this probably is the most important, passion. You don't hear a lot of passion from the bankers, but my view, passion is renewable. Passion is a macro tool. This is not micro tool. It's a macro tool like Japanese transition bond issuance and subsidy allocated to all the technologies. But without passion, this is not going to go anywhere. So I'd love to finish off with a positive tone that we're all passionate. We may have different views. That's fine. But with real passion, and I hope to come back COP31. Maybe we're going to celebrate my birthday again. But let's come back with a true passion. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So yes, so wrapping up. So yeah, thank you very much. And so all the guests, all the panelists, and thank you very much. And so yeah, finally, so I would like to say that transition finance is so far is a so niche concept. It is so necessary to evaluation and how to fund the future. So I see, as I said, so transition finance is a bridge ambition and implementation, and so we should understand the recent shift to the transition finance. It is so idealized models to problematics. So Ishikawa-san said sector-specific strategies. Today, thank you very much, and so many panelists, and so this just so chaotic situation. And thank you very much. And so this concludes our panel discussion for expansion of transition finance hosted by METI. Thank you everyone and who joined us today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to our distinguished speakers for joining us in person and online, even though it's very late in your time zone. But yeah, also thank you to all of you who have joined us here at Belém and also wherever you're joining online. So thank you very much for joining.